You're listening to episode 8 of the Poolman podcast, the stroke episode. This episode was recorded October 11th, 2019. I've designed this podcast to give you all the information you need to keep your pool in tip-top condition all year round. But occasionally I'll have a special episode to deliver, and this is another one of those special episodes. It's about December 2nd, 2018, the day that changed my life forever. The Poolman podcast is written and produced by me, and is intended as a guide only. I always recommend that you employ the services of a professional pool technician should you encounter any problems you're unable to solve yourself. Welcome to the 8th episode of the Poolman podcast. I'll start out by saying welcome back to all the loyal listeners out there who've been wondering where the hell I've been for the past 10 months and why there was such a long hiatus between episodes. Well, I can assure you that there was a very good reason why I haven't managed to do an episode for a while. I had a stroke. Now, this episode will probably be part medical information, part personal diary, and a whole lot of crazy stuff that's been floating around in my head. So strap yourselves in, and I'll tell you about what happened. Way back on the morning of December 2nd, 2018, I woke up at around 2 a.m. with what I thought was the early signs of a migraine. Now, for anybody who gets migraines regularly, as my wife and I do, you'll recognise the symptoms as usually always starting with spots in front of your eyes, blurred vision, and then it progresses into a severe headache with nausea and severe photosensitivity. In reality, it's the gift that just keeps on giving, only this time was different. As usual, I got the spots and the blurred vision, and trying to be proactive, my wife gave me a couple of aspirins and told me to go back to sleep. I was due to start a bar shift at the club across the road. I was working at midday, so when I woke up I still had spots, but no headache. So I assumed it was a little one and hoped that it would pass, and that the aspirin had worked with the headache. My bar shift went a little crazy. A couple of hours in, when I was trying to pour some beers, a schooner glass dropped through my hand and onto a tray below, but it didn't break. I tried again, and the same thing happened, but this time both glasses broke. Sadly, it didn't click. This may have been a bit more serious than a migraine. It's only now in hindsight I can look back and see how clear the symptoms really were. Having dropped another glass, I decided to take a run out to the tables in front of the bar to pick up some glasses. But almost immediately I smacked into a table and tripped over it, crashing to the floor. I hadn't even seen it. I then proceeded to bump into a group of customers, nearly knocking them over too. So I went out the back to have a short break, and one of the managers came up to me and said I didn't look too well, and maybe I should go home. Of course, I said, no way, it's Sunday, I can't lose out on penalty rates. So I sucked it up and got through the shift. I walked home across the road, and by this time I had some pins and needles in my left arm, and some slight weakness as well on that side. But pins and needles are also a common symptom of a migraine, and naturally I didn't think too much of it. Other than having the feeling that I probably would get a severe migraine pretty soon. So it was back to bed with some heavy-duty painkillers to await the migraine I thought was coming. My wife, who's a nurse, told me to go to the GP first thing the next day. So naturally I ignored her and went to do my first pool job instead. She loves it when she's right. The second job was back closer to home, and I wasn't feeling too good by then. I knew I was about to drive right past the medical centre, so I decided to drop in and see the doctor. He took one look at me and said, "Buddy, you're going to hospital right now." He tried to call an ambulance, but, as usual, I ignored medical advice, took the car home, and my wife had organised a friend to drop me at the ER instead. A few hours and multiple tests later, I was admitted into the emergency department of Liverpool Hospital and scheduled for a CT and an MRI scan. And a day later, the doctor confirmed that I had indeed suffered a fairly substantial stroke, affecting the visual cortex of my brain. The scans showed very clearly the area of my brain that had sustained the damage, and I was to stay in the stroke ward for the next week. There's no getting around it. I have brain damage, and there's no chance that it'll heal. The brain just doesn't do that. The area of my brain that controls and processes visual impulses that travel from the eyes along the nerves to the visual cortex had suffered a blockage of some sort, which disrupted the flow of oxygenated blood and effectively starving that area of my brain until it died. As a result, I've suffered a partial loss of vision in the lower left-hand quadrant of both eyes. I failed my vision field test, and the doctors advised me I can no longer drive my work ute, or any car, which is quite a big deal when you work alone on the road. Now, whilst the brain can't heal itself, it can in some cases have the ability to find alternate pathways for those signals to get through. And there's the possibility that you can regain some or all of that lost vision. This, however, has not proven to be the case for me so far. And whilst I'm hopeful, I am also quite realistic about the chances of that ever happening. So imagine this, one day everything's going along fine and the next day your life's changed forever. How would you handle that? I've suffered roughly a 25% vision loss, possibly permanent, and I have to say it took me to a pretty dark place. A place I've never been before, and a place I had some feelings that really scared the crap out of me. So apparently depression is a thing, and I reckon I've got it. Whether or not it's a direct result of the stroke is up for debate. Perhaps it's something I've always had, and the stroke simply brought it to the surface. I don't really know, but I am fortunate that I have a large group of friends and family that supported me in the absolute darkest parts of this journey. Sadly, there are also many people out there that don't have the same sort of support network that I do. And I really feel for them. Many of them feel that there's just no hope, or that their loved ones would be better off without them. I know this because this is exactly the way I felt. The stroke ward at Liverpool Hospital is a very busy place. There's a lot of very sick patients there, and people die every day in that ward. As busy as it is there, it's also a very lonely place, and you can really feel the sadness there. Lots of family members begging the medical staff for information about their loved ones' conditions and hoping for good news when in reality there's not a lot of good news to go around there. I was in a shared room, and just outside the door in the hallway I heard a doctor giving a family possibly the worst news they'd ever heard. There was an 18-year-old girl, a marathon runner, who was out training, and unfortunately she suffered a massive stroke in the area of the brain that controls movement. The thing I remember is the sound the mother made when the doctors continued on about how bad the brain injury really was. I didn't hear what the doctor said, but it was obvious by her reaction that the news was not good. I later found out that she was not expected to walk again. That really woke me up, and in a really sad way it showed me just how lucky I was. And yeah, I wish it hadn't happened, but holy hell, it could have been so much worse than it was. You really have to look at the big picture when something like this happens, and be grateful for what you have, not for what you've lost. Because there's always somebody out there who's in a worse position than you. A special thanks goes out to my father-in-law Ray, who stepped up and took over the driving duties for me when I was recuperating. Friends Fiona, Paul, Leanne and Taylor all took days off from their own busy schedules to help me out. Your help was really gratefully appreciated, and I thank you so much for that. And finally to my wife Nicole, who's put up with my mood swings and grumpiness. Hopefully that's all behind us now and we can look forward to the future. Feedback for this episode. Naturally, because it's been so long between episodes, I have no feedback. Given the nature of this content and the episode that you've just heard, I feel that feedback should take a break, at least until the next episode. That's about all I have for this episode, but send your questions in and I'll try to get to them all in the next one. The same with the Poolman Podcast Jingle Competition. Keep the entries coming in and I'll play the first contestant's entry very soon. Remember, I'm looking for something catchy but not too serious. Have fun with it and get your entry in, and you could have your song become the official jingle of the Poolman Podcast. This production was made by me and should only be used as a guide to keep your pool clean and clear. I always recommend that you employ the services of a professional pool technician should you have any issues that you're unable to solve yourself. You can email your questions to thepoolmanpodcast@gmail.com and put in the word question in the subject field. It just helps me sort through them all a bit quicker. I now have a Facebook page up and running. You can find it over at facebook.com/thepoolmanpodcast. And I'm also up and running with a Poolman website, where you'll be able to find the show notes for the podcast, info on my business, and tips and tricks on how to keep your pool sparkling. Head over to commandopool.com.au or just search for the Poolman Podcast in the Apple Podcasts app, Overcast, Stitcher Radio, which is available on iOS and Android. You can also find the podcast over at thepoolmanpodcast.podbean.com. I do ask that after you listen, could you please give me a rating and subscribe so you're automatically getting the next episode when it becomes available. It also gets my numbers up so I rank a little higher, and that also helps other people find me too. So thank you very much for that in advance. I hope you can join me again for the next episode of the Poolman Podcast, coming soon to a podcatcher near you.